Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Hadi Mian here with another episode of RevTalks. Today we're joined with Paul DeJarnette. How are you doing, Paul?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So if you could give us a little bit of background and overview of Mistwire.
So Mistwire.io is, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, my brainchild that came out of some extended time I spent in the military, where I spent a lot of time doing both defensive and offensive work on the cyber side. And then when I left the military, getting an opportunity to see some additional layers of how the industry thinks about cybersecurity. A lot of traditional thinking focuses on beefing up your security because there's not a whole lot you can do about the reconnaissance value of somebody mapping your network.
Understood.
Think of it like somebody driving by your house. If they drive by your house and try to figure out how to break in, right? The state of things, right? Them casing the place, that value that they get from that doesn't change every time they drive by. And the product that I've built takes a look at that and says, okay, well, what happens if we introduce that fog of war? What happens if we say the doors and the windows move constantly? And the people who live there know how to get in and out, but people who don't live there and don't know the people there, they can't figure out where the doors and windows are. And if they drive by to try and figure out what the best way in would be, that intelligence they get every single time changes. And so the unpredictability and the randomization of all of that is kind of where that value is. And I think additionally, if you really dig into it, there's a lot of concern in the space today, like, hey, AI is a problem. People talk about Mythos class and Daybreak, you know the frontier models that have really made it easier for attackers to break their way in and reduce that time. It still can take quite a bit of time for somebody to try and break in, but they have to have intelligence. They can still do it. I've seen numbers as wildly differing as 45 to 47 minutes to break in, all the way up to 20 some odd hours to break in. And then they live on your network for upwards of 279 days. My question then is, well, what would happen what would happen if I gave you the time to actually focus on hardening the internal infrastructure? Because that external layer is moving at such a pace that an attacker can't figure out what is actually there. They can't figure out what that landscape actually looks like. All of a sudden, you have time to figure out how to actually keep up with the other things and harden the other things and secure your data and protect your enterprise.
Understood. So could you walk me through the core architecture? Like how does Mistwire actually remove predictability at the network layer?
But we sit right on the inside edge of a boundary, and we use an agent to essentially create a proposed topology that an attack surface would look like, right? Your boundary, your outside edge being the attack surface, right? So we propose up to a certain number of theoretical topologies. We have another agent that takes a look at that and goes, is that going to break anything? What do I need to do in order to implement this? And then it implements it. We have another one that sits in there and goes, okay, based on the traffic I see coming in and out, does this match criteria that are, it's a known CVE, known threat signature, known attacker, any of that? And then we have another agent in there that actually sits and looks at all the agents themselves and goes, is this agent behaving according to baseline? Is this agent making the right decisions? Is it in keeping with the fundamental principles of what network security should actually look like? If so, we can take the metadata about that and write it to a blockchain that the internal environment, the admins and the tools users, like people in a SOC, they'll be able to take a look at that and go, this is what's happening. And they'll get the explainability and the credibility engine backing all of that. In addition, multiple customers, if I have multiple customers, then I can take knowledge and intelligence like, hey, let's say you encountered an attack and you're one of my customers. Well, I have however many other customers that may have the product, and you learned that this particular attacker is operating with this kind of behavior and this kind of signature. Well, you implement a rule set. That rule set then gets federated to all of the other tenants within my cloud. As a result, everybody's security level is getting uplifted right there on the spot.
Understood. How does the AI or decision engine distinguish between legitimate anomalies and or actual attack patterns?
So there are a couple of layers, right? There are two agents that are really involved in that. One of the agents is the one that sits on that boundary layer and goes, these are the proposed topologies, right? That topology planning process is based on what we know are known good and like gold standard ideas of what secure networking should look like. So we're already implementing a known good and we're mapping against that. Then we have the other agent that is doing heuristics and mapping against the CISA KEV, the cloud security benchmarks, et cetera, and looking at all of those kinds of things. What does NIST ask for? What does CMMC ask for? Is the behavior that is traversing this edge in keeping or not in keeping with these things? And it's reasoning about it. It's not just sitting there and going, yes or no. It's actually sitting there and reasoning about it. And it can call the right tools in order to assess. And then it's going to take that data and it's either going to take the metadata and write it back to that blockchain, or it's going to forward it back to the original agent and say, hey, we got this pattern. We need to stop this behavior. In the meantime, all of that is being visible to people in the security side on, say, the SOC or your Cyber Fusion Center or whoever is actually sitting there and doing the tools monitor. They should be able to see and interact with that.
Understood.
So
Now,
we're
what
enriching
happened?
your SOC with data. We're not replacing.
Understood. I just had a quick question. Sorry to interrupt you,
Go ahead.
but what happens when the autonomous system makes a wrong call? Is there like a human in the loop override?
There is. So one of the things that I've believed pretty strongly in the process of building this is we don't want this system to be a black box. Mistwire is based on the idea that the systems we build are kind to the users and kind to the systems they run on. It's not kind to the users if you can't explain what happened. So everything, number one, gets written. Like I said, the metadata about those decisions gets written to that blockchain. I've also locked it down so that only one of the agents can actually be interacted with by a human.
Understood.
And it'll have the right criteria in order to understand where the connection's coming from. So if it's coming from the SOC, it'll deliver data for a SOC analyst. If it's coming from a particular login, say from the executive suite, well, at that point, we need to be able to give a different layer of information and a different layer of knowledge. And all of that is still going to be written. We're never deprecating or just deleting data wholesale. We're just taking the data and finding the right way to either enrich existing tools or use existing ways to explain. If it makes the wrong decision, we'll know. Because we're writing the data to and the data about the data to the blockchain, it's immutable, right? Those decisions are things that can be explained. One of the other things that we're doing is we recognize that there can be drift across time, right? If you have an agent that is making decisions and it is trying to take action in your environment and you have a set of rules that it's supposed to follow, over time, its ability to follow that set of rules can shift based on the amount of data that sits in memory and the amount of things that it's encountered over that period of time. So what we do is we say, well, we know what the baseline deliverable was supposed to be. We know what the baseline as delivered out of the box agent is supposed to behave like based on what the customer has asked for. And the same way that a SOC is staffed, right? A SOC doesn't have the same person sitting in there 24/7, 365. They go home, they rest. After they've had enough rest, they come back. And then with fresh eyes, they look at things. But while they're gone, somebody else sits down and takes their place. So the way we've looked at that is we've said, okay, we have to have tooling in place that says, okay, after N turns, we take agent X and we swap it out. Pop in a new hash, a new signature that says this is the new one. Any running task on the old one finishes, and then that one goes into an archive for X number of days for data retention. But the new one steps in and immediately picks up right where it left off. After all of the 4 agents that we've just talked about have been rotated out for a new set, that's the end of the shift and a new shift has begun. And so we actually cycle through agents on a continual basis while keeping and storing data about what those decisions are and what those agents were doing for a particular period of time so that we can evaluate, so we can assess, so we can triage, so we can make our own function and our own systems better. And when I say our own, it starts first for that customer. I'm not taking that data here at Mistwire. The customer is getting that, right? I'm not taking and storing all of that within my own data sets and my own graphs and my own nodes, right? I'm not putting that data somewhere where the customer can't access it. So their systems and their agent performance is going to be based on two things: whether or not we've really well defined what it can and can't do within their environment, and whether or not they have good data to operate from. That's going to be the limit of that agent's effectiveness. But even in that particular context, to answer your question, right, what happens if it makes the wrong decision? Well, we'll A, know it, and B, we should be able to course correct very easily because we don't have a lot of time between the start of a shift and the end of the next one. It should be very similar to how a SOC is rotated out in terms of staff, right? So it's not going to be 36 hours. It's not going to be 72 hours or a full week. It's going to be however many hours that the customer decides between the start of a day and the end of a day, and they'll know. So the amount of data they'll have to sort through and filter out and figure out is very small compared to a traditional environment where agents get deployed and they just run. I mean, an agent, the whole benefit of an agent is to be able to have a long running thing. Well, our hypothesis has been, yes, you can have a long running agent, but if your long running agent can get swapped out and still operate because the data set itself hasn't changed, then the agent effectiveness is still going to be at a high bar.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for those words. What goals do you have for Mistwire as we move on to 2026 and go into 2027?
There are several. Obviously, we'd like to have some design partners. We'd like to have some folks who want to prove out that this works for them. So we're actively seeking that. We'd also like to get backing to be able to expand the team to get some really quality engineering to add on to what we've already built. We'd love to be able to not just rotate ports, protocols, and services, but also do things like OS fingerprint and to eventually move beyond, a zero trust and regulated space kind of environment to something that can include small and medium business, right? Small and medium businesses present a different problem because a lot of times they have less focus on, hey, we have our own network, and more, we have this bundle of services from these different providers and each person has their own device. That's great. That makes it a whole lot harder for us to sit there and figure out, okay, well, what then constitutes the corporate network? Once that's better defined and we have a better way of establishing a solution for that, that'll be a delivery that we want to make as well.
Perfect. Paul, thank you so much for joining us on RevTalks today. Where can we find Mistwire on the internet?
Right now, there are two places you can go. One of them is on Discord, and the other is literally mistwire.io online. Both of those are live. And you can find me on LinkedIn. Mistwire's on LinkedIn as well, and you can tag us there, and we'll happily engage in conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us on RevTalks today, Paul. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you
You
so
too.
much for talking about Mistwire to me and the audience.